Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. I am Devavani Chatterjea. My pronouns are she and they, and I am a professor of biology at Macalester College, and I will let my colleagues introduce themselves really quickly.
Morning, everybody. My name is Nancy Bostrom. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Associate Director of Assessment at Macalester College.
And good morning, everyone. I am Bethany Miller. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Institutional Research and Assessment at Macalester College.
Right. Well, thanks, everyone, for being here today. We will begin with the acknowledgement that our project was carried out at Macalester College, which sits on the ancestral homeland of the Dakota people who were forcibly exiled from the land. We honor the Dakota people, ancestors, and descendants, as well as the land itself. We recognize that this acknowledgement itself is not enough and only serves as a first step toward decolonization.
And we'd also like to begin with a few notes of thanks. So the project that we're talking about was a pilot that we've done for a couple of years. And early on, it was supported by both the Associated Colleges of the Midwest, so the ACM, and then also some funds from the Mellon Making Meaning grant. Also want to give a shout out to our Series Center for Scholarship and Teaching and our Office of Institutional Research and Assessment, especially our student employees, our student research assistants, Daryl Senek and Shek Fall, who helped us quite a bit with some of the development and analysis. And then other partners throughout the project were our Department of Multicultural Life and our Institutional Review Board. So we just wanted to start out with a big thanks because this really has been a big collaboration from the beginning.
Yeah, so why did we do the study? As Bethany mentioned, we'll have the next one up in a second. Yeah, lots of different reasons. And one of them, and this is, of course, even before the pandemic lockdown, the Macalester student body is changing. And this is true of other campuses across the country as well. We had 62% more domestic Black, Indigenous students of color in 2021 versus 2012. And some of these data are drawn from the National Studies of Student Engagement, but overall, we observed that non-dominant group students had significantly lower GPAs in the first 2 years and also reported a differential lack of belonging in classroom and a lower perception of support. So these were, a couple of proximal reasons that drove us to think about how we could address, issues of connection and connectedness and community in the classroom setting. At the same time, Macalester faculty are extremely committed and ready to make our institution more equitable for all students. And so 81% of faculty surveyed in 2019 strongly agreed that an equitable, inclusive campus was a priority, and a recent analysis identified holistic teaching as an opportunity area. Bethany alluded to some of the trends that we observed in the literature, and we'll share just a couple with you here. So this is a study from Dr. Kionia Booker at the College of Charleston. Nancy, there we go. And this study was done in a sense of belonging and classroom community and the relationship between those to degree persistence for African-American undergraduate women. And what this study does that we appreciated was that it linked, academic performance to this, what they called a delicate mix of affective, behavioral, and cognitive factors, and pointed to the fact that faculty can really foster the connection students make not only with them, but with each other, with their classmates. And so this is the piece that, kind of was one of the touch points for us. And learning is maximized when students feel a sense of belonging in the educational environment, and what the intervention we're about to talk about does take time away from the strictly academic activities in the classroom, but here's the connection between learning and the sense of belonging that students might feel in an educational environment. So those were some of our inspirations and jumping off points. And someone mentioned, Helen mentioned in the chat about the pandemic lockdown. And yes, we began this pilot after this time of intense disconnection and dislocation when we were all coming back together in person as a campus community. I'll let Nancy take over.
And I'm going to just talk a little bit about the pilot that we've used. Our process really has been evolving over the past several years. Like I mentioned, we started in the fall of 2021. And so every semester it's been a little bit different, but I think we've landed on a process that's worked really well and that we'll use going forward. But the elements that we're sharing today are the things that have been held steady across all of the administrations. And so first, really what we're trying to do is recruit faculty who are interested in making community building a priority in their classes. And as Devavani mentioned, it does take about an hour, so willing to devote one class period to community building activities. And then the very first semester that we did the project, faculty who helped us with the pilot received travel and research funds. To make the work more sustainable, we're not doing that anymore. But what we've done in the last year is we've said to faculty, if you're interested in having a classroom community and connectedness session in your course, we'd like to train you how to do it so that you can go with one of us to facilitate a session in another faculty member's course. And so we're trying to recruit faculty who are interested in having it in their course and then also learning how to do it in other classrooms. We have administered this, I guess, for a range of anywhere from 7 to about 20 classes in any given semester. So as we were thinking about what kind of intervention makes sense to look at classroom community and connectedness, it was really important for us as we were developing the process for collecting student feedback that students have agency in the process of improving the learning environment in their course. And it was important for us that the process that we built, that the process itself would also contribute to building community in the class. So we leaned a little bit on participatory action research and interactive evaluation practice, and put together an in-class graffiti activity. So here's a little bit about how that works and what the product sort of looks like. So we have 1 to 2 facilitators. It's usually 2 facilitators. It's usually somebody from the core team, so the 3 of us, or another person from institutional research and assessment, and then another faculty member. So usually 1 or 2 facilitators. It's a 45 to 60 minutes during class session. And the first part of the session is a space for students to have individual reflection time and to individually provide input into the classroom community. And we ask them 4 questions, and we ask them to write their ideas on Post-it notes. And we tell them to write down as many ideas as they can think of, 1 idea per Post-it note. So the first question is, what's working well to build classroom community and connectedness in this course? And then again, we take as many ideas as possible. The students write them at their workspaces, and then we collect those Post-its. Then we ask them, what are the barriers to classroom and community and connectedness? What can the students do to improve community and connectedness in this course? And then what can the instructor do to improve community and connectedness in the course? So we've collected the individual feedback from all of the students, and then as they're reflecting and writing on the other Post-it notes, we're collecting the Post-it notes from earlier questions and putting them on a big poster board. Then we divide the students into 4 groups and make each group responsible for sort of analyzing the input for their question. So students then work together in groups to identify the themes. And so here on the right, we have just an example of what the finished product looks like from the student standpoint. So the question here was, what can students do to improve community and connectedness in this course? They wrote down all their ideas on these pink Post-it notes, and they were all over the board at some point. But then as a group, they got together and they read each of those individual Post-it notes and started thinking about, well, what are these themes that we're seeing? And then we encouraged them to write the name of the theme on the poster board. And you'll see here they did that. Plus, they got a little artistic and added some drawings to emphasize their meaning. But in this case, for example, the students came up with 4 main themes. The first one was engagement. The second was outside of class engagement. The third was respect and open-mindedness. And then the fourth was communication. And so you can see, for example, I know it's hard to read those Post-it notes, and we don't expect that we would take the time to do that right now, but just to give you a sense of what's happening in each of these themes, for example, in the engagement theme, it's all about participating in the class and engaging in the material of the class. And the little drawing that they've got one drawing with people around the table participating, but then up above they have somebody who's reading a book on philosophy and says, oh, that's so cool, I think I'll bring this up in class. So the idea was that they're participating in class, but then also engaging with the material on their own and then bringing it back to the class. Outside of class engagement were things like, let's get together and form study groups, for example. Respect and open-mindedness was all sorts of comments about being open to other comments, open to other ideas, showing respect for individual comments, that sort of thing. And then the communication was more along the lines of, making sure that you're speaking up in class, making sure that you're voicing your needs, that sort of thing. And then you can see that they drew a little line through some of these. And I think that's really important because a lot of these things are interconnected. And so when we're looking at the analysis from a bigger picture, that's one of the things that we're always thinking about is, yeah, these are individual themes, but they're also interconnected. And then you'll see that there are these blue dots. And what we asked students to do after they identified themes was individually to go around the room and put a blue dot by their priority theme for each of the course or each of the themes. So they did that individually. And then this gave us kind of a sense of the top ideas or the top priorities from a class perspective. And that's something that we could share with the faculty members in the class. So that kind of brings us to the next stage of the process, which is the debriefing with the faculty member. So I should clarify that the faculty member isn't in the course when we're doing this session, but within a couple of days of the session, we're meeting with the faculty member to give them their feedback. And we phrase it as anonymous feedback. So students, we're not saying who said what, that sort of thing. And then the faculty are strongly encouraged, of course, to use that information to make adjustments in their course, to talk to their students about the feedback that they got, to maybe work together on ideas for what the group would do together to make any adjustments. But then also if there's something that the students mentioned that they would like, but the faculty member is saying, that's not something I want to do in this course, to just be upfront about why they might not want to implement a particular suggestion. And then finally, the project team collects feedback from students and faculty about the process and any effects, and that's looked a little different each of the phases. In the very first semester of our project, we had all of the individual courses, but then we also aggregated the poster boards across all courses. So across 20 courses, we aggregated the themes and the ideas to try to get a sense of best practices. And then we shared the aggregate results with students and faculty, and then have used the feedback to then adjust the process for the next time. And Bethany's going to share a little bit about what we learned from the surveys and the evaluations that we did after each of the sessions.
Yep. And so as Nancy said, what we've done throughout the process has sort of been iterative. You can go to the next slide. But we have learned lots of things along the way. So these are the fall 2021 student survey highlights. No, this is the entire year. 2021 student survey highlights. And so we really learned that for 93% of the students agree that it's important to be intentional about building community in Macalester courses. About 69% agreed that the classroom activity and ideas generated help to build community. And I think as Nancy pointed out, and I think Devavani will talk about in a little bit, we didn't just focus on what the faculty member could do, but also what the students could do to help build community. And we saw really great sort of live action iteration of that, where students took opportunities to create channels for communication and that sort of thing. So they really seemed to be interested in not only what other people could do for them, but also what they could do. And then 77% agree that the classroom activity would be a valuable experience for other classes at Macalester. Okay, next slide, please. And then at the end of the course, students responded or reported higher levels of agreement with feeling connected to others in the course, feeling that members of the course could depend on them, and feeling more confident that others will support them, just sort of based on the activity in the classroom and the subsequent work or implementations that the faculty member made after the project. But we didn't just ask students what, if they thought this was useful and what they did, we also asked faculty. And so 92% of the faculty responded that the ideas generated in the classroom activity definitely or probably helped build community in the course. And 92% indicated that they used the feedback to make adjustments. And then we see a little bit of an increase because in the fall of 2022, 100% indicated that the ideas generated really helped, that they used the feedback, and that they would recommend this activity to other colleagues at Macalester. Okay, and so it's important to note that during this time period, we really have made process revisions and feedback. And so we asked, like, some of the faculty highlights include also like getting the unbiased insight about what the students are struggling with, but don't necessarily want to mention to the instructor. As Nancy said, the instructor of the class is not in the classroom when we're doing the activity, but we provide them with language to prep them for the visit so that they understand what the purpose is and why the feedback would be really important. And then they also said it demonstrated to students early on that we're invested in hearing from them and being responsive to their concerns. Because again, this happens around the third week of classes. And so not at the midpoint where you might have mid-course evaluation or those sorts of things, but really early enough that that faculty are able to sort of make changes and students can see that well before they get too far into the course. And then the concrete suggestions that faculty members got from the class were fairly minimal, though useful and implemented. But we thought this was important, that the faculty member said the most important piece of the program was the experience. I noticed the shift afterward in how students talked to one another and the responsibility they took in the classroom. And so part of this is also really about helping students understand their own agency and how they can build community for themselves inside and outside of the classroom, which we think is a really valuable skill, not just for these courses, but for sort of setting our students up to be successful lifelong learners. Okay, and so another piece of the fall 2022 highlight is that from the student surveys, 87% agree, because we asked them not just about what was happening in the classroom, but on the survey, we also asked them about the process, because again, as Nancy said, this process is really iterative, and we try to make space for it to evolve in a way that is going to really make sense for students and going to serve what we see as our true purpose for this project well. And so 87% agreed or strongly agreed that they felt personally welcomed and included during the activity. And then 91% agreed or strongly agreed that their ideas were taken into account as the team worked together to develop themes. And that's one of the things that we put in the script sort of explicitly, is that even during this process, to pay attention to how they are incorporating and including each other, and recognizing that even going through this process together as a class is an opportunity for them to be able to make meaning and be able to sort of shift the culture of the class.
And so Bethany talked a little bit about some of the quantitative data that we got from our pre-post surveys, and then some of the evals that we did with faculty. We wanted just to, before we share some of the aggregate results and our word clouds we created from the student feedback, just wanted to share a little bit of the process so you see where these big themes came from. So as you can imagine, we had a mountain of data. We had 20 times 4 big poster boards with all these sticky notes and themes that students identified. We had some help with some student workers on campus who actually typed in the themes and the individual post-it note comments. So we had a large Excel sheet with all that information. And then what we did as a group is the three of us and some others that were helping us, we started with the student identified themes, just the themes themselves, and got a sense of the meaning of the theme based on the name of the theme and then the individual post-it notes. So we started with that. And then as we thought about some of those themes, we started connecting them to identify sort of meta themes across courses, because as you can imagine, there were some similarities about themes that came from different courses, but they might not have talked about them in the same way in their theme. And so we tried to combine themes from individual courses to look at meta themes. Then we reviewed some definitions in the literature, so things like collaborative learning, active learning, that sort of thing, just to make sure that when we came up with our own definition of the themes, that it was in line with what's happening in the literature. And then we allocated student-identified themes to these meta themes. And so what Devavani will be sharing are the meta themes that we came up with, and then some of the individual themes that we constructed the meta themes from. So you'll see there's a couple of layers going on there.
Yes. And so as Nancy mentioned, that there's just mountains of information, post-it notes, themes from all of these classes. And we really, our course selections, certainly over the years that it's been done, they have spanned, most of the academic divisions of the college. They've gone from large introductory survey courses to advanced seminars, courses that are just more mixed, courses that have different groupings of folks because of the content and the, to whom that class is attractive. So we've just had we have a wide range. And so we are steadily working through getting a handle on this type of analysis for the 4 questions that we shared with you earlier. What is working, what is not working, what can students do, what can the instructor, what can the faculty member do to improve community and connectedness in a particular classroom. So these are some examples we want to share from the first question: what is working to promote and strengthen classroom community and connectedness in this class. And so here we have our cultivating invitation and belonging, right? And that arose as a strong meta theme. And if we go down one layer and look, these are practices But the biggest word here is humanity, which is really an experience. And, the many ways in which students described it is just kind of checking in. So there's check-ins as, I'm human, you're human, how are you doing today? Right? Creating a welcoming environment with a grounding moment, bringing positivity, positive energy, a positive environment, emphasizing interpersonal connection, recognizing identities, even, things like icebreakers, which sometimes we might roll our eyes at, but, they do have their place as a human act of connection. Classroom norms, like, really being explicit about the class structure, about democracy and consensus, asking questions of taking care of people's needs when food is provided. Just a lot of small things to large things under this meta theme of cultivating invitation and belonging. Really are kind of our number one that emerged from, what is working to promote connectedness and community in the classroom. And then there were a couple of others. Creating a collaborative learning culture. Looking at the slide, I almost wish that we put collaborative in kind of a larger font, because I think that really was the big message that came. And it's a lot of us are instructors in the room, and again, like how many we've heard about group work. We have heard that. At the same time, working in groups, and I think this had something to do after the dislocation and disconnection of the lockdown as well, of really wanting to work with one another. But I think a really important piece here that came up, and not necessarily in the words, but in the discussion and how it was presented, was collaborative versus competitive, right? So the emphasis in the wording and the language was definitely in collaboration, but group activities, group discussions, small group discussions, where everyone was supported, people could work to help each other solve problems, come to solutions together, engage with one another in a collaborative rather than a competitive way. So it's somewhat related, instructional strategies, but we did pull these out because in a way, these are more kind of mechanistic. So surely, you can organize a course syllabus to foreground collaboration rather than competition, but the experience of people in the space. So, how folks are sitting, are they looking at one another versus, everyone looking at the instructor and most at the backs of their friends' heads? What kinds of class activities are going on? Are there Slack channels or other, ways of communication between the students, which may or may not include the faculty member, in many cases not, but are tied to the learning in the class? Again, emphasizing that we're learning in community, you're learning with one another, your learning is, only going to be amplified by how you support others in their learning and receive support from them in yours. So that message is important. And I think Bethany mentioned this earlier. We did have some students create Slack channels for their classes, like as we were working on this activity in the classroom, and in some cases they said, again, this happens fairly early on in the term, to say, this is one of the first things we did as a group where we all talked to one another, and now we know people's names. Another classroom we were in, they did kind of a name sharing exercise right there, as we were cleaning up our poster boards. So I think that like really structurally implementing these spaces for connection and paying attention to how the room looks emerged as an important issue. So this is a slide with a fair amount of text, and we don't expect you to read all of this, but and as I said, we are still working through a lot of the data, so we don't have themes and word cloud analyses done for all of our questions yet. But what is increasingly becoming clear to us as we go through the data is that there are layers of intervention, and these layers of intervention are interconnected. So Nancy and Bethany have mentioned, and I have also shared a few examples, that really some of this is student-led. They make time to connect with each other. They leverage their human skills, relationship building, organizational, social, to do so. They recognize what skills they have and what skills others have, and they exchange these skills in respectful ways, and they're mindful of their own voice and their silence in the room, and mindful of others as well. So these are very human scale, student scale interventions, actions that can happen to bolster community and connectedness. And then, of course, instructor-led, and we talked about some of that as well. Approaching, being really intentional in course and syllabus design, to promote collaboration and not competition, to help students learn each other's names, facilitate some of this, channel building and connection building, build in time to check in, ground students when they arrive, ask about their human lives, and use tools like this tool, right? To say, what, this is important enough for us to build our learning community that we're going to give, an hour, but we've done it in 30 minutes too. That was an express version. We want to put some time aside to do this in a more intentional way. But all of these are contained within the vessel of institution scale interventions. And we do want to draw attention to that. Because again, schedules that have longer class times, they allow for conversations, check-ins, activities like this to happen in more organic ways that don't seem breathlessly taken away from instructional time. Classrooms, learning spaces, this is increasingly happening. Classrooms are being designed so students are looking at one another. They can talk to one another through the class period. Right? But interventions like the ones we did, faculty are investing their time, their attention, their energy and effort. And so giving credit to faculty for implementing these kinds of approaches in the classrooms, and acknowledging and recognizing and rewarding these in tenure evaluations and annual reviews. Creating capacity on campus for students to lead and facilitate difficult conversations, because those are the things that can tear classroom communities apart, right? If those conversations, which will come up because we're all learning about a complicated world, if those conversations can bring people together, those conversations can tear people apart. But creating support, creating tools, creating resources, offering them to students and faculty, it's important. Providing bystander intervention training to faculty so that when we're letting students connect with each other and have challenging conversations, we are also equipped to hold things together if things begin to fall apart. Recognizing, giving time to faculty staff collaboration. So I really want to pause here and big time underline this. So I'm a faculty member, and this project would not even have been possible, without the partnership of Nancy and Bethany and the partnership of their unit, right, of institutional research and assessment. And this kind of critical collaboration, I think, is so important for student well-being and for our own sense of community, because faculty and students are doing shared work, but we often do it in silos. And so this visibility to each other's work has been so important for us. It's brought us closer. It has given us a better sense of how we manage our own workloads and how we can do so together. And providing, continuous, progressive, and compensated professional development opportunities, not only for faculty, but for staff to expand these kinds of toolkits for relational skills, right? So I think these are bigger scale interventions, some of which are happening in places, some of which, there's a lot of room for growth. But I think this is what allows instructors and students, to be able to do their best work in this realm and really other realms too. So so we have this kind of thought slide for us to chew on. And any questions, comments, anything else, but also, if you have some things to share from your university, we would love to, or your college, we would love to hear.
Just out of curiosity, does Macalester have at the Center for Teaching and Learning a repository of some of the kinds of exercises and activities that you mentioned for building community in the classroom, sort of an easy reference point for instructors to go to find sort of short community building exercises or activities?
So I'm not completely up to date on, whether specifically that kind of repository is being built. I think this was, I was at the center, our Center for Scholarship and Teaching, when we implemented this project. And so this is a resource that is specifically targeted toward community building. But I think there are a lot of resources. There's a big repository of resources for, syllabus guidance and inclusive classroom practices, and that all kind of support this work. I don't know how many there are that are intentionally like exercises for building community other than this one, but I haven't looked most recently, so I might not be representing all of it.
Yeah, and I would just add that I'm not aware of any that are explicitly connected to this yet, but one of the ideas that we had with this project is to take the aggregate feedback across all of the questions and to put together a toolkit that more explicitly connects to all of these things. And so that's still under construction, but certainly something that is really important to us as we're thinking about how to help make the connection between what we learn in our CC&C sessions and then now what do we do about it. We have hosted faculty conversations among faculty who have participated in CC&C. Our latest was a happy hour this spring, just to get people talking together informally about what they learned and what kinds of things that they did in their classroom, what they changed and how they did it. So there's been some informal conversations, but we haven't made that formal connection yet.
You may have said this and I missed this, but were there patterns that you saw in terms of participating class sections? Like, was it mostly first year courses, mostly mid courses, larger, smaller, some disciplines more than others?
I can start. It was all across the board. We've seen things with newer faculty, and we've also seen things with faculty who have been here for 30 years. So we've seen a full range of participation. I would say the only exception so far has been we have yet to have a course from the fine arts participate, but every other division has been represented in some way. And everything from a first year course to a senior seminar capstone course.
Thank you.
I think we have received a little bit of feedback, though, as Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe this was feedback we received from students who identified as first generation students, that they would like to see it in first year courses. Writ large.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Devavani. And it's one of the things that I think part of the selling that we do when we're recruiting faculty to participate, and we do a lot of the recruiting through our Center for Scholarship and Teaching, but then also individual conversations with faculty to talk it up. And I think and then some presentations about what we've done, through our Center for Scholarship and Teaching. And one of the selling points is that, some of the numbers that Bethany shared, like that students are saying this is important. And I think one thing that we hadn't shared on that slide is I think it was 75% or so said this is important. But the other part of that was only 38% were saying that this is actually happening. And so we can point to that disparity and say, students are asking for this. And so I think that's part of it. And then another data point that Devavani was mentioning is that when we ask that question about, is this something that should happen? Is this something good that should happen in courses? It was our first generation students that were saying yes. And that number was much stronger. I mean, students as a group were saying, yes, it should happen in other courses, but it was especially strong among students who identify as first generation. And so that's another reason that we talk to faculty about, the importance of building community.
And as always, students have the best ideas, right? And so there have been so many conversations kind of at the tail end of sessions, they'll stay behind and chat with us about, how this went and what we should do. And so, we've had, I've had conversations with students saying, wouldn't this be so cool if like in one term, every class in a department did it, and then we had all of that data. And then, we just looked at all of it on the department level. I mean, it's a brilliant idea, right? It's a really, really great idea. And so I think just those conversations with students have yielded, and then also conversations about taking this process into other settings, right? So not necessarily a class, but maybe a student organization, maybe, a faculty department meeting, so I think that, yeah, if we put it out as a tool, people are very creative and flexible with the ways in which it can be used.
Did you work with part-time and full-time faculty?
There's a question here about lab-based classes. So I think some of the classes are classes that have labs, but to my knowledge, it hasn't been sort of split up, where the lab is taught by an instructor and they did their own CCNC and then the class did its own CCNC. I think it's just mostly the classroom based, but some of those classes have labs. And I think labs actually are a natural place for this to happen. Like students do work together in groups and they have a little bit more of this organically happening within the class, but I don't know that we explicitly did this for any lab separate from a class.
Yeah, no standalone labs, but yeah, classes that included labs. Yep.
I also heard that there was a question about whether or not we did it whether or not we did it with just full-time or part-time faculty. Any faculty who were teaching a class within that semester were eligible to participate in CCNC. They just had to say that they wanted to do it.
See, Joe in the chat mentioned something about being intrigued by the idea of students processing the data. And I think that's exactly right. I mean, that was one of the things that was important to us, is that we'd have almost like this built-in member checking with the qualitative data, so that we're looking at and analyzing the data, but a lot of it is based on the original student analysis. And so we're being really careful to honor the themes that the students came up with and making sure that when we're doing meta themes, it all connects back to those individual feedback. And yeah, frankly, it's like, it's a lot of work. And to be able to come out of a classroom with the initial analysis done is amazing. And we use that practice in a lot of the work that we do with departments and courses, where we have a kind of a hybrid method where we have reflection time and we get student feedback and then we get their help with the analysis. And I feel like it's a more valid way to do some of the analysis, and it includes the students, gives them agency, and it's also really practical for a small office to get help with doing the analysis. So for me, it's like the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I'm quite happy with our mid-semester feedback technique, what a lot of places would call a small group instructional diagnosis. And I talked about why we felt the need to rename it, because I can't just leave things alone. The two things I'm taking away are that the power, we do a voting process so students have a sense of agreement and wording, but the idea of actually letting them organize the feedback is really interesting. The other thing I took away was how the community focus makes it really important to do this early, whereas ours is it's a mid-semester feedback. It's a holistic review. So you do need some of the class activities to have happened and maybe have happened a couple of times. But we have people who want to do these quite late in the semester because there's a different goal. And it's something to chew on, to maybe work with our faculty on, if you're thinking about community, maybe you want to do it early. If you're thinking about reviewing how the exams are going, maybe you want to do it after you've had a couple. That's a really neat wrinkle.
Yeah, one comment I was going to add to what Nancy said earlier, about sort of the students doing the analysis. I think, yes, it is all of those things that Nancy said. And it lends a level of specificity and ownership. So we're not just talking about how do we build stronger classroom communities? We are talking about, or they are working on, how to make their community that they are standing in at that moment and looking around and seeing each other in the room, how to make that community stronger. So I think that is a powerful aspect of this process.
Yes, and just getting back to one of the things that Joe mentioned. So we are collecting these priority blue dot stickers to look at kind of consensus, but the individual feedback from students is also really important. And so we have we include an individual reflection sheet. In the latest iterations, we've had students reflect individually on their own priority. Then we've asked them questions about, like, well, what does this look like for you? What kind of recommendation would you make to your faculty member, so that we don't lose those individual things that are most important too. And I think for us, one of the questions was, we want to make sure this is inclusive. And if there is a class with maybe just 1 or 2 BIPOC students, they're not in the majority, we want to make sure that it's an inclusive process and that we're including everybody's idea of what's the most important thing for us to pay attention to. And so we wanted to make sure that we disaggregate it in that way, so that things aren't being lost or erased because of maybe a small group of students in a particular class.
I think Nancy and Bethany have really worked hard on the sustainability of this process and shared some of the things that they have done in terms of, like really building out the process to bring in faculty to contribute if they're also going to benefit from it. But, the 3 of us have talked about this, and I certainly think it's really important, if this is a long running thing, for every few years to do it in the way that we did it initially, is to gather the data and take a look at it. Because, a lot of times we're just going to be able to do the process, get the benefit from it, give some feedback to the faculty and move on, which is not unlike the mid-course interview, which is a slightly different version of a mid-course evaluation, but also happens later in the process, later in the course of a term. So, this process done early has benefits just from doing it, like that, there's just benefit from doing it, and you get some ideas on how to strengthen community right away. But I think this holistic look at it, that has been really important, kind of getting to hear from students how they feel about the inclusivity of the process, doing the demographic breakdowns, paying attention to how many faculty, are reporting back what they did, and asking students whether this is helpful and across, see if the trends emerge across demographic groups or types of courses or anything like that. So I think every few years, it would benefit from a little refresh of the data. But, again, the sustainability of the process really depends on, everyone pitching in and just getting the thing done.
When you talked about training faculty who had gone already, who had their courses, had someone come into their courses, training them to do that for others, what did that training look like?
It was about an hour over lunch, and we have a fairly extensive protocol from that was approved by our IRB. So we've written kind of virtually a script so that it's administered similarly across the different classes, and the process is really step by step. So we have an hour with lunch, and then we walk through that whole process and talk about what it's like, and then one of us is along with the session to make sure that it flows smoothly and to answer any questions. We also have to provide, honestly, a lot of supplies. So if they're the poster boards, all these pens, all these markers, all the Post-it notes, and we get help from students over the summer to help us put packets together so we're ready to go. But then the 2 of us then together facilitate. But then last spring and fall, when the faculty member was getting trained, we also asked them to be the one to give the feedback to the faculty member in the course, and we sort of stepped out of that loop. So that made it more sustainable for our office, so we weren't doing 20 sessions and 20 individual feedback sessions with faculty. So we're just trying to divide up the work. But people I know have benefited from that feedback process as well, and created some relationships and continue to meet sometimes over the course of a semester or a year just to exchange ideas.
Yep. And so I would say the other benefit of having faculty going and do it in other faculty's classroom is that one of the unintended benefits of this has been that faculty are able to build additional community for themselves, not only by us having this sort of meetings with them at the beginning and end of the semester to gather feedback, but also as they're going into each other's classrooms and meeting to give the feedback, it gives an opportunity to build those relationships and for them to be able to build some extended community as well.
I'm really intrigued by the interacting levels of ownership of potential interventions. That's a very useful model. And I'm thinking about it in terms of some of the things that we do at our center that I think have shown a lot of institutional ownership, and clearly the people who have gone through it have developed a lot of faculty and staff ownership, and we don't have a clear path to how that becomes like student ownership of some of those more inclusive community practices. We're working with the Ideal Center at Science Museum of Minnesota, which would be right down the street from you. They do really nice work. But I'm wondering, like, is it within your remit to work with the folks who might be able to either marshal more institutional support or bring messages to students in a different way, or like what's the future for that kind of information at your institution?
I would say that there is always opportunity. I think we have done some work to continue to build those relationships, not only with the Center for Scholarship and Teaching and how we make space for folks to be able to do that, but we've also been able to work with the provost and dean of the faculty so that if faculty members are participating in CC&C, that can also go into their addendum at the end of the year, and there's some, credit for whatever that means. Devavani understands that better than I do, so she can sort of explain what credit means there. But like they can sort of get some credit, I guess, for engaging in like looking for it in terms of DEI, thinking about pedagogy in the classroom, those sorts of things, because it really does. We heard from faculty, it changes the way that they think about and engage with their students in their classroom. And so I think we're allowing that process, and Nancy and Devavani will correct me if I'm wrong, but we're allowing that process to also evolve and see where some natural collaborations and efforts sort of open up. I don't think we've closed ourselves off to any sort of ideas about where this could continue to sort of go and grow.
And so maybe just to throw, sorry, Devavani, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Right. I was just going to mention that our Board of Trustees passed a new strategic plan last fall. And so we have these working groups right now that are meeting over the summer to bring in ideas for changing a lot of things around campus, everything from the curriculum to physical spaces, everything. And well-being is such a big part of the strategic plan. And so I think some of the work that we've done is going to filter back into those working groups so that they can think about the importance of community in everything that we're doing within the strategic plan, and bringing in those ideas so that they don't get lost. That's maybe one other way where we're kind of working bottom up to bring some of those ideas to a larger institutional process.
So maybe I'll just mention, Joe, I think in your question, I heard a little bit about how do we build in student ownership of these? And is that one of the things you were asking?
I think it was.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead if you want to add
more.
Well,
so I think what was in my head was, how do you make sure that people like student affairs professionals are hearing these are cross-cutting areas that students might appreciate, be open to more training in. But I think that's part and parcel of how do we get the students to own it.
Yeah, I know. And I think there are a couple different pieces to that. And I think one piece kind of structurally goes back to this importance of building in more, staff faculty collaborations, right? I think institutional research and assessment are such a natural home for this project. But as of course you are picking up, there are other touch points too. And those kind of, there are other touch points that are more directly in student affairs. And I think this project, of course, I adore my partners, so I'm completely biased and said, this project, we've hit it, but if we use this project as a model and look for, and look at other possible projects that bring faculty and staff together working with students, I think that visibility can only help strengthen the connections. The other part of your question that I heard, about students, and I think that is something as an, as an educator is kind of always front and center and top of mind for me is, this is their education, and I think the more opportunities that we have to build in student leadership and to really intentionally and very visibly say that, this is that you are the leaders of your own education, because the fact that is a fact, and that is factual. We are there to guide and facilitate and coach, but they are the leaders of their own education, right? And so I think that the more ways we can build that into aspects of classrooms, for me personally, they really resonate with all of us learning from one another and having a better experience, and Nancy and I are certainly, this has been a long conversation, ongoing conversation for us to think about more concrete ways in which students can have those leadership positions, within the classroom, in terms of contributing to the classroom community, of, the inclusivity and equity of, the instructional experience. And we continue to think about ways in which students can be can have leadership in those areas. And I think institutionally, we need to think about skill building and capacity building as well. So, yeah.